I ended part 1 of this series in Portland, Maine, where this alignment emanating off the North American Star Tetrahedron leaves North America and crosses over the Atlantic Ocean and heads towards North Africa. I will be starting this video in the North Atlantic Ocean and the New England Seamounts, on the way to the island of Tenerife in the Canary Islands, then across the North African countries of Western Sahara, Algeria, Niger, Chad, Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and ending it at the island republic of the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. I'm going to focus on things like striking similarities in building styles and design features, landscape features, some of what we know of its history, and the extensive mining and resource extraction activities of this region. My name is Michelle Gibson. I speculated at the end of part 1 of this series, as I have in other videos, that what are called continental shelves and the marshy estuaries that are found all along the Earth's coastlines are actually submerged landmasses and ruined land. I have been studying harbors and bays in depth around the world in present and past research. They have similar characteristics of what appears to be sunken and destroyed land, in particular along continental coastlines, and in these cases shown here next to international airports and bodies of water that are described as either estuaries or lagoons. On the top left is Logan International Airport, located right next to Boston Harbor, which is described as a natural harbor and estuary of Massachusetts Bay, and the same configuration at the JFK International Airport in New York alongside Jamaica Bay, Sydney International Airport on Botany Bay in Australia on the bottom left, and the Pohnpei International Airport on a small lagoon islet connected to the main island of Pohnpei by a mile-long causeway in the Caroline Islands in the Federated States of Micronesia. I have come to believe that the sinking of Atlantis happened at the most hundreds of years ago, and not thousands of years ago, as we have been taught, and that this advanced civilization was worldwide. This advanced civilization that developed on Earth originated in the far distant past in ancient Mu, also known as LeMuria, and that this was the same civilization known as Atlantis, which I believe existed up until relatively recent times, and represents the missing positive timeline of humanity. The process of doing the research along this alignment and other alignments has provided extensive evidence for a worldwide advanced civilization, which has been deliberately suppressed, misattributed, and removed from our collective awareness, so that we would not know about its existence. For comparison of similarity of appearance is the Temple of Khnum in Esna, Egypt, pictured on the left, and the Victorian-era Temple Mill in Leeds, England, on the right. While this map may not represent the actual extent of the Earth's landmass at the time of the fall of Atlantis, it is the closest representation on a map that I could find to a depiction of the continental landmasses being much more connected than what we have been taught to believe in our historical narrative, a narrative which doesn't even officially confirm the actual existence of Mu, also known as Lemuria, and Atlantis. Mu and Atlantis are treated more like historical maybes. Maybe they once existed, and maybe they didn't, and typically placed in the elusive mythical category by academia. Now I'm entering the North Atlantic Ocean on this alignment of cities and places along the alignment that originated at the northern apex of the North American Star Tetrahedron in Edmonton, Alberta. The Atlantic Ocean is one of the most enduring locations of the fabled Atlantis. Most of the research in this video is based on a series that I published in 2018, shortly after I started blogging and making videos in 2018, though I will be adding in a considerable amount of research along the way from other projects covering the same places that I have done in the 6 years since then. But this is the first time I have looked at the North Atlantic Ocean and its underwater topography. I didn't think about looking into it until my trip earlier this summer to the Balkans. On my airline flights across the Atlantic and back, I watched the in-flight tracking map for my entertainment, and I kept seeing things like seamounts and fracture zones come up on the screen. And then when I was looking for images for the area around Portland, Maine, at the end of my last video, I came across images of the New England Seamounts and the surrounding area in the North Atlantic Ocean that placed them on the alignment on its way to the Canary Islands, where I had started previously. So I'm going to look at the following places circled in red on this map: Georges Bank, the New England Seamounts, the Corner Rise Seamounts, Bermuda, and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Georges Bank is a large elevated area of seafloor between Cape Cod, Massachusetts and Cape Sable Island, Nova Scotia, and separates the Gulf of Maine from the Atlantic Ocean. Georges Bank is the most westward of the Great Atlantic fishing banks and has supplied lucrative fisheries for Atlantic cod and halibut for centuries. We are told that the now submerged portions of the North American mainland are in the continental shelf running from the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, and that it was part of the mainland as recently as 8,000 to 12,000 years ago. The Grand Banks of Newfoundland are a series of underwater plateaus southeast of Newfoundland on the continental shelf, and one of the world's richest fishing grounds. The underwater plateaus of the Grand Banks are relatively shallow, running from 50 to 300 feet, or 15 to 91 meters in depth. Interesting to note that the 7.2 magnitude Grand Banks earthquake in 1929, which took place on November 18th, struck the southwestern part of the Grand Banks bordering the Laurentian Channel, causing an underwater landslide, Canada's largest ever, that severely damaged underwater cables. It also generated tsunamis that struck the southwest coast of Newfoundland and the French overseas territory of Saint Pierre and Miquelon, killing an estimated 27 people, but there was never an official report made. I make note of this because while at one time I would have believed the official narrative that earthquakes are natural disasters, I just don't accept that explanation without question these days. Same thing with hurricanes and tornadoes. I now believe technologies for causing earthquakes and weather warfare exist and are being used today, and that they have existed for far longer than we think. Next, the New England Seamounts. The New England Seamounts are described as a chain of 20 underwater extinct volcanic mountains, known as seamounts. A seamount is a large submarine landform that rises from the ocean floor without reaching the surface of the water. They are defined by oceanographers as independent features typically formed from extinct volcanoes that rise abruptly from the seafloor from 3,300 to 13,100 feet, or 1,000 to 4,000 meters in height. Guyots are seamounts with a flat surface on top that we are told was created by such things as wave action over a long period of time. So, for example, the Bear Seamount, part of the New England Seamount chain close to Georges Bank, is an example of a guyot. It is shown here next to Physalia Seamount. Both the Bear and Physalia Seamounts are part of the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument, which was created on September 15th of 2016 by President Obama by Proclamation 9496, which was a power granted by the U.S. Congress under the Antiquities Act of 1906, which gave the President the authority to create national monuments from federal lands to protect significant natural, cultural, or scientific features. It is the first U.S. Marine National Monument in the Atlantic Ocean, and protects 4 seamounts and 3 submarine canyons on the edge of the continental shelf. It is interesting to note that these seamounts, described as large submarine landforms that rise abruptly from the ocean floor and independent features, typically formed from extinct volcanoes, sounds very similar to the definition of monadnocks, which are found on land. This translates to a hard metamorphic rock that was originally pure quartz sandstone, that is an isolated rock hill, knob, ridge, or small mountain that rises abruptly from a gently sloping or virtually level surrounding plain. Here are some other examples of places classified as monadnocks. Pilot Mountain in North Carolina on the top left, Harteigen in Norway on the top right, Devil's Tower in Wyoming on the bottom left, and Kurura in Australia on the bottom right. But what if monadnock, for one example, is a word used to cover up gigantic tree stumps? Here are some examples of giant trees and stumps that are identified as such. In this comparison, we have the Devil's Tower from another angle on the left, the Jugurtha tableland in Tunisia in the middle, and the Hammam Damt volcano in Yemen looking very tree stumpish. Now compare these three with the Bear Seamount on the right. The New England Seamounts, along with the neighboring Corner Rise Seamounts, are part of the New England Hotspot, also known as the Great Meteor Hotspot. What we are told is that these seamounts were formed when the North American plate moved over the New England hotspot 75 million years ago. Hotspots are defined as a region of Earth's mantle where magma arises from within the Earth and forms volcanoes on the crust above. Now I'm going to take a look at Bermuda, just to the southwest of the New England and Corner Rise Seamounts. Bermuda is described as an archipelago of over 170 islands, with the most significant islands connected to each other by bridges, like the Somerset Bridge, the world's smallest working drawbridge, that was said to have been constructed in 1620, as it was mentioned in the Acts of Parliament of Bermuda's first Parliament in August of 1620. Bermuda is the oldest of the British overseas territories, having first been settled by the English in 1612. For historical perspective in our narrative, 1620 is the same year the Pilgrims on the Mayflower left Plymouth in England, bound for North America, on September 16th. The capital of the British Overseas Territory of Bermuda is Hamilton. This map shows the location of the Royal Navy dockyards in Bermuda. We are told that it was built by the British Royal Navy in 1795 and was once home to Britain's largest naval base outside of the United Kingdom until it closed permanently as a naval base in 1995. Now it is the home of the Clock Tower Mall, hosting a variety of shops, boutiques, and restaurants. This is a 1624 map of Bermuda, attributed to Captain John Smith, who was involved with the Virginia Company of London's plan to colonize Virginia for profit. Smith's books and maps were important in the English colonization of the New World. As a matter of fact, there are dozens of old forts on the island of Bermuda to this day, like Fort Hamilton, Fort St. Catherine, and Fort Cunningham. What we are told is that in 1606, King James I of England and VI of Scotland issued royal charters for what became known as the Virginia Company and the Virginia Company of Plymouth, with the objective of raising funds from investors in order to colonize the eastern coast of America. The Virginia Company was responsible for colonizing the east coast between the latitudes of 34 degrees north and 41 degrees north, and the Plymouth Company between the latitudes of 38 degrees north and 45 degrees north. The Virginia Company established its first settlement of James Fort in Jamestown in May of 1607, and the same year established the Popham Colony in Maine. Jamestown was considered the first permanent English settlement in the Americas, and served as the capital of the Virginia colony from 1616 until 1699. The Popham Colony, near the mouth of the Kennebec River in present-day Phippsburg, Maine, in 1607, was established a few months after Jamestown. The Popham Colony, however, was short-lived, only lasting 14 months before being abandoned due to multiple problems, from lack of funding to lack of surviving colonists. Yet Fort St. George was said to have been built there during that time. Next, I'm going to take a look at the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is described as a mid-ocean ridge located on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean and part of the longest mountain range in the world. Although mostly underwater, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge runs across Iceland, where it can be seen above sea level. We are told that the existence of this ridge was identified first by an American expedition in 1853 and confirmed by a British expedition in 1872 and again by a German expedition in 1925. Then in the 1950s, the Earth's ocean floors were mapped by a team of American geologists. Amongst the team's discoveries was that the bathymetry of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge showed valleys and ridges, and also that it is part of a 25,000-mile or 40,000-kilometer-long continuous system of mid-ocean ridges on the floors of all the Earth's oceans. This led to the theory of seafloor spreading and general acceptance of the continental drift theory proposed by German geologist Alfred Wegener in 1915, who was a 1905 graduate of the Humboldt University of Berlin. In 1915, Wegener published The Origins of Continents and Oceans, in which he theorized that the Earth's continents move or drift relative to each other over geologic time. So apparently, the idea that at one time there was one large supercontinent is not in dispute. The issue is when and how the continents separated, slowly over geologic time, known as uniformitarianism or gradualism, versus suddenly and catastrophically, and academia supports the former explanation. So while initially Wegener's theory was not accepted by academia because there was not a proposed mechanism, the continental drift theory was later incorporated into plate tectonics, the scientific theory that Earth's lithosphere is comprised of a number of large tectonic plates that have been slowly moving for 3 to 4 billion years, and this is what we are taught today. In similar fashion, Sir Charles Lyell, a Scottish geologist, was said to have demonstrated the power of known natural causes in explaining Earth's history. In his books, The Principles of Geology, published in 3 volumes between 1830 and 1833, He presented the idea that the Earth was shaped by the same natural processes that are still operating today at similar intensities, and as such, a proponent of uniformitarianism, a gradualistic view of natural laws and processes occurring at the same rate now as they have always done. This theory was in contrast to catastrophism, or theory that the Earth has been shaped by sudden, short-lived, violent events of a worldwide nature. As a result of Lyell's work, the glacial theory gained acceptance between 1839 and 1846, and we are told during that time, scientists started to recognize the existence of ice ages, and do to this day. And in so doing, provides the perfect cover for things like megaliths and megalithic stone structures in North America, by calling them glacial erratics from the last ice age. Now I want to take a look at the Atlantis Massif in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. The Atlantis Massif is a prominent mountain mass in the North Atlantic Ocean. It is roughly 10 miles or 16 kilometers across and about 14,000 feet or 4,267 meters in elevation where it rises from the seafloor. Its highest point is only 2,297 feet or 700 meters beneath the surface of the ocean. It is slightly east of the intersection of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the Atlantis Transform Fault in the Atlantis Fracture Zone. A transform fault is defined as a fault along a plate boundary where the motion is predominantly horizontal. A fracture zone is defined as a linear feature on the ocean floor over a long distance that is caused by plate tectonics. The word fracture itself is commonly associated with the breaking of a hard object or material. As we know, fractures can happen suddenly as well, not only as a slow gradual process over time. Among other things, the Atlantic Massif is particularly noteworthy for a feature called the Lost City. What we are told about Lost City is that it is a hydrothermal vent field that was discovered by a deep ocean research submersible with a crew named DSV Alvin, owned by the United States Navy and operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in December of 2000. DSV Alvin is supported by the RV Atlantis, a research vessel that is also owned by the United States Navy and operated by Woods Hole. You'd think they might be interested in trying to find the lost Atlantis or something. Next on the alignment, we come to the Canary Islands, an island group and the southernmost autonomous community of Spain in the Atlantic Ocean. Historically, the Canary Islands have been considered a bridge between Africa, North America, South America, and Europe. The Canary Islands have also long been believed to be a part of the legendary continent of Atlantis, along with the Azores, Madeira, and Cape Verde Islands. These island groups are collectively known as Macaronesia, from the Greek words meaning islands of the fortunate. This is what we are told about these four island groups, known as archipelagos in the North Atlantic Ocean. Each archipelago is made up of a number of Atlantic oceanic islands, which are formed by seamounts on the ocean floor, whose peaks have risen above the surface of the ocean. I'm going to focus my attention here on the island of Tenerife in the Canary Islands on this alignment. Mount Teide, a volcano on the island of Tenerife, is the highest point in Spain and the highest point above sea level in the islands of the Atlantic. Teide Observatory, a major international astronomical observatory, is located on the slopes of Mount Teide. Although the peak of Mount Teide seems to not have a completely regular shape, this is the projection of its shadow. Tenerife is the largest and most populated island of the Canary Islands, and its capital is Santa Cruz de Tenerife. The Canary Islands are an autonomous community province of Spain and are located off the coast of Morocco. In our historical narrative, the Spanish conquest of the Canary Islands in 1496 was considered the basic model of European attack on the New World. Violent colonization that involved enslavement of the local population, genocide, and the mining of the land's resources that radically changed the landscape. This is a picture of a view of Santa Cruz de Tenerife showing a similarity of tower construction compared with the Bermuda Parliament building in Hamilton on the right, with the similar architectural design in both locations on different sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Among other examples, I came across exactly the same style in Atchison, Kansas, and the ancient city of Ouarzazate in Morocco. The pyramids of Guimar are located in the town of Guimar on the island of Tenerife, terraced structures that were built from lava stone without the use of mortar. Compared with the pyramids of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, also terrace structures made of lava stone, there are 7 terrace pyramids in Mauritius and 6 in Guimar. In both places, they are in perfect astrological alignment with the winter and summer solstice. As already mentioned, the Canary Islands are said to be of volcanic origin and have been visited by researchers from the very beginning of the 19th century, including Alexander von Humboldt in 1799, a Prussian naturalist and explorer who was said to have climbed Mount Teide before heading off to study Venezuela. And in 1815, the German geologist and paleontologist Leopold von Buch visited the Canary Islands, where he primarily studied the production and activities of volcanoes. Von Buch studied with Alexander von Humboldt at the Freiburg School of Mining and was considered a founder of modern geology. The Freiburg University of Mining and Technology is the oldest school of mining and metallurgy in the world, having been established in 1765 by Francis Xavier of Saxony of the House of Wettin. Its main purpose was the education of highly skilled miners and scientists in fields connected to mining and metallurgy. It is interesting that the coat of arms of the German noble house of Wettin has a wyvern tail in the middle of it, and I found this coat of arms of Tenerife showing a large tree in the center and wyvern supporters on either side. I do think these heraldic devices are telling us truths that have been well hidden from us. Wyverns are 2-legged winged creatures that are similar to dragons, but unlike dragons, which can be good or evil, they are unambiguously malicious predators. Wyverns in heraldry signify war, envy, and pestilence. Primarily through Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, first cousins and members of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha of the Ernestine branch of the House of Wettin, the original royal houses of Europe were completely replaced by this obscure German ducal lineage. Humboldt University in Berlin was named after Alexander von Humboldt and his brother Wilhelm. It was first opened in 1810 and was regarded as one of the world's preeminent universities in the study of natural sciences in the 1800s and 1900s. Famous faculty and alumni included such famous names in our current historical narrative, besides the previously mentioned Alfred Wegener of continental drift fame, include the theoretical physicist Albert Einstein, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, collaborators on the Communist Manifesto, Otto von Bismarck, first Chancellor of the German Empire, Georg Hegel, whose philosophy gave us the Hegelian dialectic of problem-reaction-solution, and the Brothers Grimm, best known for their fairy tales, which have such storylines as eating people, as in Little Red Riding Hood and Hansel and Gretel. The next place on the alignment we come to is Layoun, the capital of Western Sahara, also known as El Ayoun. The meaning of both names refers to water springs. Western Sahara is a disputed territory and classified as a non-self-governing territory by the United Nations. It is claimed by and de facto administered by Morocco in ongoing dispute with the native inhabitants, the Sahrawis, who want self-governance. The Western Sahara is composed of the geographic regions that include Rio de Oro, meaning River of Gold in Spanish. This is what the landscape there looks like today. We are told that Rio de Oro became a Spanish protectorate in 1884 as a result of the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 was organized by the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck and regulated European colonization and trade in Africa during the New Imperialism period and coincided with Germany's sudden appearance as an imperial power. The imperial state of Germany in our historical narrative existed from the unification of Germany starting on January 1st of 1871 and ending in 1918 at the end of World War I. It was also called the Second Reich. And who were the Nazis, anyway? I wonder if there could be a connection to Ashkenazi. The same word is actually in the name. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But then again, maybe it isn't a coincidence. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in 1744 in Frankfurt, Germany. He established his banking business there in the 1760s, which became the start of the international banking family. The Rothschilds were to Europe what the Rockefellers were to the United States. Mayer Amschel Rothschild and his 5 sons established their international banking family dynasty throughout major cities of Europe. And this is a saying that has been attributed to more than one prominent member of the Rothschild family. starting with the first London family banker, Nathan Mayer Rothschild. Nathan had become a Freemason in London of the Emulation Lodge No. 12 of the Premier Grand Lodge of England in October of 1802. By the time of his death in 1836, Nathan Rothschild had secured the position of the Rothschilds as the preeminent investment bankers in Britain and Europe, and his own personal net worth was over 60% of the British national income. Same folks that want you to believe that the Jewish peril, the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, first published in Russia in 1903, and describing a Jewish plan for global domination, was an anti-Semitic forgery. At any rate, Otto von Bismarck was the mastermind behind the unification of Germany and the formation of the German Empire in 1871, and served as its first chancellor until 1890. The outcome of the General Act of the Berlin Conference can be seen as the formalization of the Scramble for Africa, also known as the Partition of Africa, or the Conquest of Africa, which was the invasion, occupation, and division of African territory by European powers during the New Imperialism period between 1884 and 1914, the year in which World War I started. The period of history known as New Imperialism is characterized as a period of colonial expansion by European powers, the United States and Japan, during the late 1800s and early 1900s. I am sure this was a motive for the Berlin Conference. There was also a rich and proud heritage of Africa and its people that has been removed from the collective awareness, that was replaced with something quite different from what it originally was. For example, Mansa Musa was king of Mali between 1312 and 1337 and was one of the richest men in world history, if not the richest. During his reign, Mali may have been the largest producer in the world of gold. But this kind of immense wealth does not fit the historical narrative we have been given about this part of the world. Instead, the minds of generations of children have been programmed with images of Africa like that of Tarzan to shape their perceptions. In the same way that generations of children have been programmed to believe that Hollywood westerns represent real history. Now back to Laayoune and Western Sahara. Laayoune was said to have been founded in 1938 and is a hub for phosphate mining in the region. Compare for similarity of appearance the double windows in the building in Laayoune on the left with the double windows of the Natural History Museum in Milan, Italy on the top right, and Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. on the bottom right. Vast phosphate deposits are mined at Boukra, southeast of Laayoune, where abundant pure phosphate deposits lie near the surface. It produces about 2.5 million tons of phosphates each year. Phosphate, a form of the chemical element of phosphorus, is a component of things like synthetic fertilizer, animal feed, and food additives, as well as many other things. Aided by the longest conveyor belt in the world, which travels 61 miles or 98 kilometers, phosphates are shipped from Boukra to Laayoune, where ships await to transport phosphates around the world. The next place we come to on this alignment is Abalessa in Algeria's Tamanrasset province in southern Algeria. Abalessa is the former capital of the Ahagar Mountain highland region in the central Sahara, along the Tropic of Cancer. Abalessa is famous for the Ten Henan tomb. The 1,500-year-old monumental grave, we are told, was built for the Tuareg matriarch Ten Henan. Ten Henan was believed to have lived between the 4th and 5th centuries AD. Women have a high status in the matriarchal and ancient Tuareg society. Among other things, primarily women own livestock and other movable property, while personal property can be inherited by both women and men. The Tuareg Shield, from which we are told the Ahagar Mountains were formed, is a host for world-class gold deposits, with at least 600 gold occurrences having been identified, and is part of the 1,864-mile or 3,000-kilometer-long Pan-African Trans-Saharan belt that was believed by some geologists to have been one of the most important orogenic systems leading to the formation of the Gondwana supercontinent. We are told that orogenic means events that cause distinctive structural phenomena related to tectonic activity affecting rocks and crusts in particular regions, happening within a specific period, in this case said to have been during the end of the Neo-Proterozoic era, the unit of geological time said to have been between 1,000 million years ago and 541 million years ago, so once again, something that happened in the very distant past and given no other explanation. The landform on the left is in Tamanrasset Province, and the one pictured on the right is Chimney Rock in Sedona, Arizona. Also, this image on the left, taken in Tamanrasset Province, is very much like what is pictured on the right in Heavener Runestone State Park in Heavener, Oklahoma. A few more things before I leave Algeria. The first is that I would like to point out a few things in Constantine, Algeria, which is in northeastern Algeria close to the Mediterranean Sea. Whoever built this place is comfortable with stone and heights. For another comparison of similarity of appearance, the photo on the left is called in English Natural Arch in Constantine. The middle one is what is called the City Msid Bridge in Constantine, and on the right is taken of a building in Grozny in the Chechen Republic in Russia. Another is a side-by-side comparison of the Brooklyn Bridge on the left, which reminds me in appearance of the City Msid Bridge on the right, which at one time was the highest suspension bridge in the world. Second is that the French started the process of colonizing Algeria starting in 1830, and by 1848 much of Algeria was under French control, when coastal Algeria was incorporated into the French departments of Algiers, Oran, and Constantine. During the French conquest of the Regency of Algeria, which had been a regency of the Ottoman Empire, the pacification of Algeria had started in 1835 and lasted until 1903, with the aim of putting an end to the resistance of the Algerians to the French invaders. Atrocities of the pacification of Algeria included a scorched earth policy against the population that had a devastating effect on the socio-economic and food balances of the country, and deporting, banishing, and/or killing entire tribes, and has been called a genocide. France began its nuclear testing program in Regani, Algeria between 1960 and 1961, before Algeria's independence. They conducted 4 atmospheric nuclear tests which contaminated the Sahara Desert with plutonium, negatively impacting those who live here to this day, not only Regani, but far beyond. Algeria's independence from France came in 1962, after the Algerian War of Independence from 1954 to 1962. Noteworthy for horrible atrocities and crimes against humanity on both sides, estimates of between 350,000 and 1 million Algerians died during the war. Algerian independence did not usher in a stable system of government. There have been civil wars ever since then, like the Algerian Civil War, the duration of which was between 1991 and 2002. It involved an armed conflict between the Algerian government and various Islamic rebel groups. It began after a coup negating an Islamist electoral victory in which the government was trying to crush the Islamist movement, but armed groups emerged to fight against the government, and again many Algerians were killed. From Algeria, the alignment crosses into the country of Niger, where it goes through the Air and Tenerife National Nature Reserves. Pictured top and bottom to the right of the map show pyramidal shapes in the desert sands. The Air and Tenerife National Nature Reserve is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and covers 29,870 square miles, or 77,360 square kilometers, and is the eastern half of the Air Mountains and the western half of the Tenerife Desert. I believe there is enduring infrastructure underneath all that sand. From there, the alignment crosses through Bilma, Niger. Bilma is known for its salt and natron production through the salt pans there, and from which things like salt cones are made, sold for livestock use throughout Western Africa. Salt is a crystalline compound of sodium chloride and widely used, for example, for seasoning food and in food preservation. And natron, a sodium bicarbonate component of salt, and historically used as well as a cleaning product for home and body. We are told that natron refers to Wadi el Natron, or Natron Valley, in Egypt, from which natron was mined by the ancient Egyptians for the burial rites of mummification. Bilma is primarily inhabited by the Kanuri people. The Kanuri people are described as the African people that founded the powerful pre-colonial Kanem-Borno Empire. The Kanem Empire was said to have existed from 730 AD to 1380 AD, and then continued as the Bornu Empire until 1900. In the present day, it is largely uninhabited, with abandoned towns still visible. This is Kanuri politician Sir Kashim Ibrahim arriving in London for a short tour in 1910. It looks and sounds like he was a person of importance back in his day. Now Tubu nomads tend the date palms of the region. So apparently, the Bornu Empire lasted right up until the 20th century. What happened to it? At one time, not only did the Sahara have a fertile savanna-type ecosystem supporting a wide and varied wildlife population, like these life-size giraffes carved in a rock in the region. The region now called the Sahara Desert had great forests, including but not limited to oak, elm, alder, juniper, and pine. As you can see in this picture, we are taught the desertification of this region started happening a long time ago. Again, the occurrence of a recent, sudden, cataclysmic event is not an explanation we are given in our historical narrative. And the silence about the history of this area in the present day is deafening. I will continue to do my best to fill in the gaps from what's in the historical narrative that is available to find. And as we've already seen, the modern history of this region, and Africa in general, is very disturbing. This is a traditional home in Niger on the left, and the designs on it reminds me of traditional Tibetan design elements on the right. Niger was colonized by France during the scramble for Africa and became part of French West Africa. Like what we saw back in Algeria, the invasion and colonization of Niger was also marked by atrocities and crimes against humanity. In today's world, Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world, ranked as number 7 out of 15 GDP per capita using purchasing power parity. The economy is primarily based on subsistence agriculture and the export of raw materials, including oil and uranium ore. Since independence from France in 1960, Niger has experienced 5 coups d'etat and 4 periods of military rule. Since a coup in 2023, Niger has been ruled by a military junta. Lastly, I would like to point out the Niger Delta Civil War and Boko Haram. There has been conflict in the Niger Delta since the early 1990s as well, mostly between foreign oil companies and minority ethnic groups, and has been ongoing in one form or another since that time. The Islamic State in West Africa has been active in Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and northern Cameroon since 2002, and has been known as Boko Haram since 2015. It is a militant jihadist group that advocates for Sharia law and has been particularly noteworthy for militant insurgency and child kidnappings, among many other things. The next place on the alignment is Biltine, the capital of the Wadi Fira region of Chad, formerly known as the Biltine Prefecture. Chad is a landlocked country in north-central Africa. France conquered the territory in 1920 and incorporated it as part of French Equatorial Africa, a French colonial empire that lasted from 1900 until 1960. Like the other countries that we have been looking at through this part of Africa, since its independence from France in 1960, Chad has been plagued by political violence and is one of the poorest countries in the world, with most of its inhabitants living in poverty as subsistence herders and farmers. Chad is ranked as number 10 out of 15 for GDP per capita using purchasing power parity. The Zagawa people are described as a Central African Muslim ethnic group of eastern Chad and western Sudan, and as nomads who obtain their livelihood through herding cattle, camels, and sheep, and harvesting wild grains. Interestingly, it is said that in the Gurgam, the royal history of the Kanem Bornu Empire I mentioned previously refers to the Zagawa people as the Duguwa, the line of kings of the Kanem Empire prior to the rise of the Islamic Safawa dynasty in 1086 AD. We are told that in 1851, a copy of the Gurgam was given by a local associated with the Safawa dynasty of the Kanem Bornu Empire to Heinrich Barth, an Arabic-speaking German explorer of Africa, and he published a translation of it in 1852. He traveled throughout Africa between 1850 and 1855, establishing friendships with rulers and scholars, and carefully documenting the details of the cultures he visited. Heinrich Barth also received his higher education at the Humboldt University in Berlin, starting in 1839, including geology under Karl Ritter, one of the founders of modern geology along with Alexander von Humboldt, the classics under antiquarian August Book, and under historian Jakob Grimm, the editor of Grimm's Fairy Tales, one of the two brothers Grimm with his younger brother Wilhelm. The year that Heinrich Barth received a copy of the Gurgam in Chad in 1851 was the same year as the Crystal Palace exhibition in London in the reign of Queen Victoria, and the first major World's Fair of the modern era. and in which I think they were showcasing the technology and architectural wonders of the original civilization before hiding it away or destroying it forever. We are told that the Crystal Palace exhibition took only 9 months to develop, from plans and organization to the grand opening with Queen Victoria. I believe the Crystal Palace exhibition was the official kickoff of the New World Order timeline. And, as I mentioned previously, first cousins Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were members of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha of the House of Wettin, the same obscure German ducal lineage that Franz Xavier of Saxony came from, who founded the Freiburg University of Mining and Technology in 1765. It is important to note that Chad has sizable reserves of crude oil, which is the country's primary source of export earnings. Also, the Wadi Fira region, of which Biltine is the capital, is reported to have large deposits of gold-bearing quartz, as well as deposits of natron, uranium, silver, and diamonds. Most of the mining in Chad is small-scale due to the lack of foreign investment because of political and cultural instability. There have been roughly 4 civil wars in Chad since independence from France in 1960. The last one started in 2005 between Muslims in the north and Christians in the south, and is continuing on in some form or another to the present day. From Chad, the alignment crosses through El Obeid, Sudan, which is the capital of North Kordofan. El Obeid is a terminus of Sudan railways. Sudan has 2,935 miles, or 4,725 kilometers, of narrow-gauge, single-track railways that serve the northern and central part of the country, with construction of the railroad said to have first started in 1878. There's an oil refinery in El Obeid that is part of Sudan's oil industry. As of 2016, Sudan held 5 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, ranking 23rd in the world. Also, there are more than 40,000 gold mining sites and about 60 gold processing companies operating in Sudan. It looks like Sudan's resources have been developed in a way that Chad's has not, in spite of both countries having the same issue of political and cultural instability since independence from Britain in 1956. Here's a comparison of a mosque in El Obeid on the left and the Signoria, which was the government building of medieval and Renaissance Florence, Italy, in our historical narrative. Also, there are pyramids in Sudan, located in Meroe, which is northeast of the country's capital of Khartoum. As the map shows, Sudan is due south of Egypt. Meroe was an ancient city that sits on the east bank of the Nile River as well. The ancient kingdom of Kush, also known as Nubia, was at one time a powerful civilization in this part of Africa. Here's an aerial view of the Meroe pyramids on the left, compared with similar-looking pyramids in Tamanrasset province back in Algeria on the right. The first Sudanese civil war started in 1955 between the northern part of Sudan and the southern Sudan region that wanted representation and more regional autonomy, and lasted for 17 years. During that 17-year period, over 500,000 people are estimated to have died. There have been intermittent states of civil war in Sudan to the present day. While not listed in the graphic showing the top 15 poorest countries rated by GDP per capita using purchasing power parity, the population of Sudan is still poverty-stricken and is currently on an emergency watch list monitoring countries most likely to experience a deteriorating humanitarian crisis due to escalating conflict, mass displacement, economic crises, and a near collapse of healthcare services. Next on the alignment, we come to Lake Tana and Gondar, a city and district in Ethiopia. First, Lake Tana. Lake Tana is the source of the Blue Nile and the largest lake in Ethiopia, and is also a sacred lake. It has been a registered UNESCO Biosphere Reserve site since 2015, along with its 7 ancient monasteries, like the main monastery of Narga Selassie on Lake Tana's Deck Island. Among other things, the heart-shaped Lake Tana has living traditions about being a place where Joseph, Mary, and Jesus stayed on their way back to Israel after fleeing Herod, and also as a place where the Ark of the Covenant was kept for 800 years before going to Axum, where it is said to currently be located. This photo is a comparison for similarity of appearance of an old bridge near Lake Tana on the top left, with the River Nith Old Bridge, one of the oldest standing bridges in Scotland, in Dumfries on the bottom right. Next, Gondar. Gondar was the royal city of Ethiopia. Today it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was the capital of the historic Ethiopian Empire, and we are told the imperial seat from the 1200s to the 1900s. The Fassel Gebi, nicknamed the Camelot of Ethiopia, was the home of Ethiopia's emperors in our historical narrative from the 17th century to the 20th century. The Solomonic dynasty, also known as the House of Solomon, was the former ruling dynasty of the Ethiopian Empire. Its members were lineal descendants of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba through their son Menelik I, the first emperor of Ethiopia. Haile Selassie was the last emperor of Ethiopia from 1930 to 1974. The full title, traditionally, of the emperors of Ethiopia was Elect of God, Conquering Lion of the Tribe of Judah, and King of Kings of Ethiopia. The overthrow of the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie took place on September 12 of 1974 in a coup initiated by a Marxist-Leninist faction in the military, and marked the beginning of a 17-year-long Ethiopian civil war, which formally ended in 1991. The civil war left at least 1.4 million dead. The last Ethiopian emperor was apparently strangled in August of 1975 by the same Marxist army officers who had overthrown him the year before. Ethiopia became a federal democratic republic in 1991 after the end of the Ethiopian Civil War. Lalibela is also on this alignment. Lalibela is the second holiest of Ethiopia's cities after Aksum. It is famous for its complex of altogether 11 monolithic churches, meaning cut out of one rock. It has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1978. The population of Lalibela is almost completely Ethiopian Orthodox Christian. The ancient Ethiopian language of Ge'ez is the oldest African script still in use to this day, and it is the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and the Jewish community in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church dates back to the acceptance of Christianity by the Kingdom of Aksum in 330 AD. The Jewish community in Ethiopia is dated back to at least 15 centuries. Aksum, the holiest city in Ethiopia, is northeast of Gondar and this alignment. A UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1980, it is in Ethiopia's Tigray National Regional State. Between 2020 and 2022, the Tigray War took place between the Ethiopian federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, during the course of which infrastructure was destroyed and many war crimes were committed, including mass extrajudicial killings of civilians that took place throughout the region, including Aksum. The conflict in Tigray led to major humanitarian crises, widespread famine, and severe economic damage to the tune of an estimated $20 billion. Aksum was the capital of the historic Kingdom of Aksum, a naval and trading power that ruled the whole region as well as parts of what is now Saudi Arabia and Yemen. There are a couple of noteworthy things to mention about the ancient city of Aksum. The first is that it is believed to be the home of the Ark of the Covenant at the St. Mary of Zion Church, and that the tablets of stone upon which the Ten Commandments were inscribed lay inside the Ark. The Ark is closely guarded by one custodian known as the Keeper of the Ark, who is the only person allowed to enter the resting chamber of the Ark. The keeper is appointed for life and can't leave the sacred grounds until death. Then there are also monolithic obelisks. Though there is more than one obelisk here, this is the granite obelisk of Aksum. It is 24 meters high and weighs 160 tons. Like the churches of Lalibela, it is monolithic in that it was crafted from a single piece of stone. The obelisk of Aksum is in the northern stele park in Aksum. There are 120 stelae here, each made from a single piece of granite, and standing as high as 82 feet or 25 meters high. Each stela looks like a building with intricately carved windows, marked stories, and false doors at the bottom. And yes, there is mining in Ethiopia, including but not limited to gemstones like diamond and sapphire, industrial minerals, gold, and tantalum. Next we come to Hargeisa in Somaliland in the Horn of Africa. Hargeisa is the largest city and capital of the self-declared province of Somaliland, which is not recognized internationally. The Horn of Africa is a peninsula that is the easternmost projection of the continent, and referred to in ancient and medieval times as Barbara, and denotes the region containing Somaliland, Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Somaliland was established as a British protectorate from the late 1800s until 1960, at which time it was unified with the rest of Somalia, which had been under Italian colonial rule. This is a map showing oil concessions in Somaliland circa 2007. There have been exploratory geological surveys done here, but the mining industry is new and looking for developers. Around Hargeisa, the mineral resources include sodium, copper, tin, and gypsum in the region as well. So, as is typical of so many places, this is the fate of much of the beautiful historic architecture of Somalia, here and elsewhere. Contrasted with the cathedral in the background in this historic photo of Hargeisa. The Hargeisa Holocaust, also known as the Isaac Genocide, took place from 1987 to 1989 by the Somali Democratic Republic, a socialist state that existed from 1969 to 1991 during the Somaliland War of Independence. The Isaac people are a major Somali clan in the Horn of Africa. The genocide of upwards of 200,000 civilians and displacement of at least more than double that number included the leveling and complete destruction of Hargeisa, which was 90% destroyed, and Burao, which was 70% destroyed. Lastly, the alignment leaves Somalia at the city of Isle. This region of Somalia is known as Puntland, which was established in 1998. Cape Guardafui is just to the northeast of Isle in today's Puntland. Ras Hafun juts out into the Guardafui Channel and is considered the easternmost point in Africa. Ras Hafun has numerous ruins and structures, and it was believed to be the location of Opone, an old trading emporium serving seemingly the whole world, Africa, Asia, Greece, Rome, and Indonesia, among other places. It was also known as the center of the world's spice trade. Cape Guardafui was known as Aromata, or the Cape of Spice, due to the abundance of spices it produced, including frankincense, cinnamon, and Indian spices. By 1930, the region was part of Fascist Italy, which existed under Mussolini's totalitarian rule as prime minister and dictator between 1922 and 1943. The Cape Guardafui Lighthouse was said to have been inaugurated in 1930 by Italian fascist authorities when it was part of Italian Somaliland. Alula is the capital of the Bari region of Puntland. It is on a headland that juts out into the Guardafui Channel on the easternmost point in Africa. Alula is situated next to a shallow lagoon lined by mangroves, a type of tree that grows in brackish water. Here's a picture of mangroves covering the coast of this area by Alula on Google Earth. Mangrove swamps are coastal wetlands characterized by these salt-loving trees and shrubs that are typically found in estuaries, where salt water meets fresh water. Estuaries have water that is salty, dirty, and unpleasant, and there are one or more rivers flowing into it, and a connection to the open sea. I have been speculating for a while now from my research that the Earth's estuaries are actually ruined and sunken land that once had the infrastructure of civilization on it. Back in Isle on the alignment, this is the Dervish Castle today, and a photo of an historic building in Isle. In today's world, Isle was notable as the secret capital for Somali pirates, and for a number of years it was a prime operating base for everyone involved in the plunder of ships passing through the Gulf of Aden, an important shipping route between the Mediterranean Sea and the Arabian Sea. Apparently, the last time a ship was hijacked here was in 2009. The pirates are gone, and since then has become a tourist destination in the Horn of Africa. While not on this particular alignment I am tracking, this is an historic photo of Mogadishu. It was the capital of Italian Somaliland from 1889 to 1936. When the Somali Republic became independent from Italy in 1960, it was known as the White Pearl of the Indian Ocean. We are told that the causes of the Somali Civil War go back to the Ogaden War that took place between Ethiopia and Somalia between July of 1977 and March of 1978. The administration of the British Protectorate of Somaliland had given Ethiopia this land in 1948 as the result of an 1897 treaty. Ethiopia won the war with the support of Cuban armed forces, Soviet advisors, and over $1 billion worth of military supplies airlifted by the Soviet Union. Consequently, the Somali armed forces and the people of Somalia were demoralized and eventually led to the overthrow of President Siad Barre in 1991, who had been the Marxist-Leninist military dictator of Somalia since 1969, after the assassination of the President of the Somali Republic, the name given to the newly independent state of Somalia after its independence from Great Britain. The following photos will show you what happened to the historic buildings of Mogadishu as a result of years of civil war. This is the Villa Somalia, the presidential residence, before the president was ousted and afterwards. This is an historic photo of Mogadishu Cathedral on the left and Seville Cathedral on the right. Seville was the capital of Moorish Spain. In particular, note the same double window design component of both of the cathedral's towers. The Somali Civil War has been ongoing for years. The situation started to stabilize in 2011. And in 2012 a new government was formed with the passing of a constitution and election of a president, but it has never ended. It is estimated that at least 500,000 people have been killed as a result of it. Leaving Isle on the alignment, I head southeast towards the island republic of the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. Now I'm going to look at the Maldives and after that the surrounding underwater topography in the Indian Ocean. First, the Maldives. The island republic of the Maldives is a sovereign state in the Indian Ocean, and to the southwest of Sri Lanka and India, and the alignment crosses over in the area of Male, the capital city of this island country. With a population of 250,000 occupying a tiny island the size of 3.2 square miles or 8.29 kilometers squared, it is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. The Maldives are considered a premier tropical beach holiday destination, offering some of the most luxurious resorts in the world. This even includes underwater restaurants like the Hura Walhi Island Resort, which has the world's largest all-glass undersea restaurant, and the luxury Muraka Hotel that is beneath the waves of the Indian Ocean and the Conrad Maldives Rangali Island Resort. The Maldives have a strong cultural and linguistic connection to the Tamil Dravidian culture of India and Sri Lanka. While not pictured here, the Maldives lie a relatively short distance southwest of the Dravidian map pictured here. More about this to come later in this video. We are told that the Maldives became a sultanate in 1153 when the king converted from Buddhism to Islam. Before that, the Maldives were Buddhist, prior to that Hindu, and originally was a matriarchal society with each atoll ruled by a chief queen. These historical photos show a Buddhist statue and stupa from the Maldives. In today's world, Islam is the mandatory religion in the Maldives. This is the Old Friday Mosque in Male. It is made from coral stone and has unique coral stonework and woodwork as well as lacquer work on the inside. The formal title of the former Sultan of the Maldives was Sultan of Land and Sea, Lord of the 12,000 Islands, and Sultan of the Maldives. The men surrounding the Sultan in the previous slide are wearing the fez. The fez is the ancient and modern national headdress of the Moors. The Moorish legacy and fez have been usurped by Western Freemasons, who claimed it all for themselves. In 1796, the British included the Maldives as a British protected area, and it officially became a British protectorate in 1887 with an understanding that they were involved in external affairs like military defense, and the Sultan was responsible for home rule. Eventually, the Sultan's ruling powers were taken over by his ministers, and a constitutional monarchy was proclaimed in 1932, with the Sultan remaining as nominal head. In 1965, the Sultan became a king with independence from Britain. Then in 1968, the new monarchy ended with the establishment of a republic in a national referendum. This is a photo of the last monarch of the Maldives, King Muhammad Farid Didi. The Sultan's palace was demolished and the grounds became Sultan Park, and what was left of the palace was converted into the Maldives National Museum, which houses a complete collection of royal artifacts, as well as archaeological finds throughout the islands. This is the Muliagi, now the presidential residence, but was said to have been completed in 1919 as a residence for the heir of the Sultan at the time. As we have seen with all the other countries on this alignment crossing northern Africa in the decades since the establishment of the Republic in 1968, the political history of the Maldives has been rather tumultuous, punctuated with many episodes of civil unrest and political instability. Now, on to looking at the Indian Ocean. Here's a map showing the underwater topography of the Indian Ocean, as well as its surrounding continents and islands. Firstly, I would like to point out that this part of the world was associated as part of the lost continent of LeMuria that has been identified as Kumari Kandam, sunken lands of the ancient Tamil civilization. We are told that the discussion about a lost continent in the Indian Ocean came about starting in 1864, when the English lawyer and prominent zoologist Philip Sclater proposed the idea that a continent that he called Lemuria had existed to explain geological and other similarities between Madagascar and the Indian subcontinent, as well as Africa and Australia. It was theorized that it had sunk beneath the Indian Ocean, but we are told that the theory that it had sunk was discredited by the previously mentioned scientific theory of plate tectonics and continental drift that gained academic acceptance in the 20th century as the only explanation. In the 20th century, Tamil writers started using the name Kumari Kandam after connecting it with Panjan legends of lands described in ancient Tamil and Sanskrit texts. According to these writers, an ancient Tamil civilization existed on Lemuria before it was lost to the sea in a catastrophe. The Pandyans were an ancient Tamil dynasty of South India. The Tamils were considered to be highly advanced, with sophisticated urban settlements, a rich cultural and artistic heritage, and advanced planning and engineering skills. Now I'm going to go back and take a look at the underwater topography of the Indian Ocean surrounding the Maldives Islands, the Owen Fracture Zone, the Carlsberg Ridge, the Arabian Basin, and the Maldives are located on the Chagos-Laccadive Plateau. First up, the Owen Fracture Zone / Transform Fault is to the west of the Maldives on the alignment and separates the Arabian and African plates from the Indian plate. It is said to represent the left side of the northward motion of the Indian subcontinent during the late Cretaceous Paleogene breakup of what was originally a supercontinent. Attributing it to the late Cretaceous Paleogene epochs of geologic time puts the breakup of the supercontinent taking place from 100.5 million years ago to 23 million years ago, and the continental plates have been drifting relative to each other over geologic time for forever. Next, the Carlsberg Ridge is to the south of the Maldives. The Carlsberg Ridge is the northern section of the Central Indian Ridge, a north-to-south trending mid-ocean ridge, which, as mentioned previously in this video, are said to be seafloor mountain systems formed by plate tectonics that is part of a 25,000-mile or 40,000-kilometer-long continuous system of mid-ocean ridges on the floors of all the Earth's oceans. The Central Indian Ridge is traditionally said to separate the African plate from the Indo-Australian plate, and the Carlsberg Ridge extends northward from where these two plates meet at the Rodriguez Triple Junction Point with the Antarctic plate to the Owen Fracture Zone. The Rodriguez Triple Junction is near the island of Rodriguez, which is an outer island in the island republic of Mauritius. Mauritius was a British colonial holding for all intents and purposes starting in 1810 and became the British Empire's largest sugar-producing colony and was a sugar-dominated plantation-based colony until its independence in 1968. On the main island of Mauritius, there appears to be an underwater waterfall next to a land feature on the Lemorne Brabant, a peninsula on the extreme southwestern tip of the island. Yet what they tell us is that it is an optical illusion and not actually a waterfall. Even though Mauritius is being researched for possibly being the remnants of a lost continent and known for its strong gravitational pull. Amsterdam Island is further southeast of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean and is considered the northernmost volcano above the waterline on the Antarctic plate. It is one of the French southern and Antarctic lands and was officially claimed by France in 1892. Here is a map of the island circa 1901, showing the island looking rather like a tree stump, with the cliffs of Entrecasteaux right below what is described as two volcanic calderas. One of the scientific fields of study here by the French are the geomagnetics of this island. Here is a photograph of Lee waves taken on Amsterdam Island. Lee waves are atmospheric stationary waves and are a form of internal gravity wave. Now on to the Arabian Basin to the north of the Maldives. The Arabian Basin is located in the southern end of the Arabian Sea between the Arabian Peninsula and India. It is an oceanic basin, which is defined as anywhere on Earth that is covered by seawater. We are told that the floor of the Arabian Basin is covered by sediments from the Indus submarine fan. submarine fans are described as accumulations of sediment deposits at the terminals of land to deep sea sediment routing systems. In the case of the Indus submarine fan, we are told that sediments were deposited in an unconfined setting on the continental shelf, rise, and basin floor covering much of the Arabian Sea, extending over an area of 42,471 square miles, or 110 kilometers squared, and 5.5 or 9 kilometers, or 5.5 miles, or 9 kilometers, from toe of slope. It is interesting to note that the term toe of slope is used to refer to the outermost margin of displaced material that marks the end of a landslide's movement. So the Indus submarine fan is being described in the same way that a landslide would be described. Yet the explanation we are given for its existence is that it was created by the erosion of the Karakoram and western Himalayan mountain ranges that was estimated to have begun at the end of the Oligocene or beginning of the Miocene geologic epochs of geologic time, roughly 23 million years ago. Continental shelves are found all over the Earth's surface and defined as a portion of a continent that is submerged under an area of relatively shallow water. I have come to believe that these continental shelves, along with the marshy estuaries and mangrove swamps like what we saw on the coast in Puntland, on the Gardahui Channel, and that are found along all coastlines, are actually submerged land masses and ruined land. It is also interesting to note that there have been underwater archaeological studies done in the Arabian Sea, offshore from Dwarka in India. Dwarka is an important pilgrimage site and religious center for Hindus, and has several notable temples. Between 1983 and 1992, detailed underwater archaeological explorations were carried out almost every year in the waters off Dwarka. Numerous submerged buildings and artifacts were revealed in waters from 13 to 39 feet, or 4 to 12 meters deep. And not surprisingly, the explanation of coastal erosion for how it happened comes up here as well. The Maldives are part of the Chagos-Laccadive Plateau, also known as the Chagos-Laccadive Ridge. It is described as a prominent volcanic ridge and oceanic plateau between the northern and central Indian Ocean. After 1973, the Indian government derecognized the colonial word Laccadive and renamed it Lakshadweep, meaning 100,000 islands in the original language. This ridge extends from the Lakshadweep Islands on the northern end through the Maldive Islands to the Chagos Islands on the southern end, all of which are described as atolls resting on former volcanoes created 60 to 45 million years ago that subsequently submerged below sea level. I found this map of the Arabian Basin and adjoining region when I was looking for images, and found the Reunion hotspot track in close parallel to the Chagos-Laccadive Ridge. This is an illustration of the postulated track of the Reunion hotspot track at the still active Piton de la Fournaise volcano on Reunion Island to the Deccan Traps in India. As I mentioned previously in this video, with regards to the New England hotspot track I came across in the Atlantic Ocean, hotspots are defined as a region of Earth's mantle where magma arises from within the Earth and forms volcanoes on the crust above. The region of west central India known as the Deccan Traps is described as a large igneous province consisting of layers of flood basalt in west central India, said to have been formed around 65 million years ago from the still active Reunion hotspot. The Deccan Traps are on the Deccan Plateau, and the Deccan Plateau is the location of Hampi, known as the Lost City of Asia, and home to a large number of palaces, temples, structures, and ruins, and considered to be the largest open monument in the world. Hampi was said to have been plundered and reduced to ruin by the army of the Sultanates that defeated the Vijayanagara Empire in 1565. The Piton de la Fournaise volcano on Reunion Island, the present site of the Reunion hotspot, is one of two main volcanoes there. Piton de la Fournaise, or Piton of the Furnace, is described as a very active shield volcano on the southeastern end of the island, one of the most active in the world, along with Kilauea in the Hawaiian Islands, Mount Etna in Sicily, Mount Stromboli on an island off the coast of Sicily, and Mount Erebus in Antarctica. Piton de Neige, or Snow Peak, on the northwestern end of Réunion Island is the highest point on the island, as well as considered to be the highest point in the Indian Ocean. According to what we've been told, unlike its neighbor volcano on the island to the southeast of it, it has not been active for 20,000 years. Réunion Island, home to nearly 1 million people, has been governed as a French region since 1946 and is the outermost region of the European Union. Chad Williams and I had a recent conversation for his YouTube channel, Deeper Conversations with Chad, and it was called Giant Trees, the Earth's Grid, and the New World Order, where we discussed, among many other things, the apparent volcanic nature of these giant trees and their integral relationship to the Earth's grid system, and how this might in turn connect to what might have taken place to render the giant trees unrecognizable as such. Our conversation started off with this intriguing illustration that Chad found in the Mundus Subterraneus textbook by Athenaeus Kircher in his research and had sent it along to me to take a look at. It seems to be showing trees on a grid exploding simultaneously, which would account for why we don't recognize them as trees anymore. In the course of this same conversation with Chad, we also talked about the consistent pattern of Western countries claiming these small islands and island groups in remote locations as their colonies or territories, and upon closer examination, it appears they were making a concerted effort to claim for their own purposes what was left of these giant trees in what I believe was a recently post-cataclysmic world. And I can't help but wonder if the Athanasius Kircher illustration on the left and the imaging map of the Earth's hotspots on the right are connected. Athanasius Kircher was a German Jesuit who published somewhere around 40 major works of comparative geology, religion, and medicine. The Mundus Subterraneus was published in 1665, depicting Earth's geography through text and drawings, and attempts to describe the structure of the Earth from a physical and chemical standpoint. He delved into such subjects as oceanic currents, volcanoes, thermal springs, and mineralogy and mining. I do believe that Jesuits like Kircher were deeply involved in the revisionist history and science that gave us what we are taught in school today, and that covers up the true history of the Earth. It is interesting to note that the 1665 publication of Kircher's work falls right in line with the passing of the Cesta QV Act by the British Parliament after the 1665 Great Plague and the 1666 Great Fire of London. This subrogated the rights of men and women, meaning all were declared dead or lost at sea. The government took custody of everybody and their property into a trust, and the state became the trustee, holding all titles to people and property until a living person comes back to reclaim those titles. The year of 1666 was also the year that Sabbatai Zevi was proclaimed Messiah, the Jewish mystic and student of the Kabbalah. He and his follower, Jakob Frank, brought the world Sabbatean Frankism. And in 1667, John Milton's poem Paradise Lost was published. As related in the poem, newly banished fallen angels organize, and Lucifer volunteers to corrupt the newly created earth and God's new and most favored creation, mankind. Lucifer goes to the Garden of Eden and convinces Eve by duplicity to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which directly led to their expulsion from the Garden of Eden. I think this was original disclosure about what has taken place here. Paradise was lost, and we were brought to the corrupted, inverted world we live in today. There is more happening around this time in our historical narrative, but this gives you the idea that 1666 was a very important year for the controllers in our current timeline. Now let's take a look at the possibility that the Réunion hotspot track and volcanic islands in the Indian Ocean and the New England hotspot track and seamounts in the Atlantic Ocean are representatives of a once existing worldwide system of giant trees that were connected to each other by magma streams and hydrothermal systems on the Earth's energy grid system, instead of a chain of volcanoes that are formed when a tectonic plate moves over a stationary plume of hot mantle material, or hotspot, deep within the Earth. Then also look at how this, in turn, might connect to what has taken place to destroy the surface of the Earth and render the giant trees unrecognizable as such. I want to start by taking a look at the Earth's magnetic field, geomagnetism, and electromagnetism. It is important to note that I have understood for quite some time, from other research that I have followed, that the Earth's energy grid system is electromagnetic in nature. I have to work my way through our current scientific explanations and piece together to the best of my ability a different possibility to present for consideration, because our current scientific explanation tells us things like the Earth's magnetic field is generated through a process known as a geodynamo by electric currents due to the motion of convection currents of a mixture of Earth's molten iron and nickel in Earth's outer core and connected to the Earth's rotational axis. The scientific study of the Earth's magnetic field is called geomagnetism. Within the modern science of geomagnetism, which again, like everything else, is based on the scientific theories of plate tectonics and of events taking place over millions of years of geologic time, there is the recognition of both magnetic and gravity anomalies. First, a magnetic anomaly is defined as a variation in the Earth's magnetic field that can be detected and measured, and attributed to geologic features that enhance or depress the local magnetic field, like for example, the magnetism in volcanic rocks, which contain iron-bearing minerals that align themselves with the Earth's magnetic field as they cool. Second, a gravity anomaly is defined as a difference between the locally observed and theoretically calculated value of gravity that reflects local variations in the density of rocks and are correlated with density variations of the Earth's mantle densities. So I've already mentioned that Mauritius has a strong gravitational pull, and this anomaly is currently being researched as being caused by a lost continent. And that atmospheric Lee waves, a form of internal gravity wave, are studied at Amsterdam Island, which is a place where the geomagnetism is studied as well. Also, Amsterdam Island is called a volcanic island, formed from a rupture in the Earth's surface where tectonic plates are drifting together or drifting apart, but as mentioned previously, looks rather like a large tree stump. Yet we are explicitly taught by modern science that magnetism and gravity are not related. But is there actually a direct connection between magnetism and gravity that is denied by mainstream science? Here are some things I'm finding when I looked for information about electromagnetism and free energy. In basic terms, electromagnetism is interaction that occurs between particles with an electric charge via electromagnetic fields. So, for example, the glowing filaments seen in this picture of a plasma globe are explained as being caused by electromagnetic interactions. When looking for information on free energy, I encountered these bits of information. In thermodynamics, free energy is an energy-like property of a system in thermodynamic equilibrium, and energy is defined as the capacity for doing work in various forms like potential, kinetic, thermal, electrical, chemical, nuclear, and so forth. Thermodynamics deals with the transfer of energy from one place to another and one form to another, and is the only accepted science that we are taught in school regarding the relationship between heat, work, temperature, and energy as codified in the laws of thermodynamics. So as I'm looking for the information that is available to find on the subject of free energy, by and large, it seems to refer back to the codified laws of thermodynamics as to why it's not possible. I found this summary on why harnessing the Earth's electromagnetic fields for infinite free energy is appealing but challenging, and it brings up several points as to the reasons we can't. Like the first point on the principle of energy conservation, which says that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed, and that any energy extracted from the electromagnetic fields would have to come from somewhere else because they themselves are not a source of energy, only a generator of electricity. The second point mentions the weakness of the Earth's magnetic fields as being a reason it wouldn't work. The fields don't have enough strength to generate significant amounts of electrical power. Same idea with the third point about technology limitations. While there is some current technology for harnessing electromagnetic energy, it is not developed enough to harness the Earth's natural electromagnetic fields in an efficient and economically viable way. The fourth point the writer made of practical implementation was that even if a way was found to extract the energy from the Earth's electromagnetic field, the required infrastructure and technology to do so would be enormous, and therefore not feasible. I highlighted the last point because the infrastructure and technology to do so was already here on Earth, and a highly advanced civilization was extracting, generating, and transmitting free energy via an integrated energy grid system that existed all over the Earth. But it was all deliberately destroyed, and I will get to that subject shortly. I also found this information on magnetic free energy, which is defined as the potential energy within a magnetic field. I have highlighted the point made here that a stronger magnetic field leads to higher magnetic free energy, because I'm heading in that direction here with another possible explanation for what creates Earth's magnetic fields besides the geodynamo process that is promoted and taught by academia. In the process of doing this, I will provide a very different explanation of what we may actually be looking at with regards to the destruction of both the Earth's energy grid and the surface of the Earth, and how the Earth's magnetic fields were weakened. First, I would like to revisit the previously mentioned Alexander von Humboldt, the Prussian naturalist and explorer who was so keen to climb Mount Teide on Tenerife in 1799, and who had one of the world's preeminent universities in the study of natural sciences in the 1800s and 1900s named after him. Alexander von Humboldt was considered one of the founders of the science of geomagnetism, having studied in great detail the systematic change of magnetic field strength with distance from the equator, and initiated synchronized magnetic field observations across the Earth, and he made significant contributions to the charting of the Earth's geomagnetic field. In this chart of Humboldt's of the Earth's magnetic field, there are 2 points of information I would like to bring forward in what I have underlined in red at the bottom. The first is that this is a world map of isodynams measured between 1790 and 1830. The definition of isodynam, or isodynamic, is connecting points on the Earth's surface that have the same magnetic intensity. The other point that I want to bring forward is that it was published in Gotha in 1837. Gotha was the home base and origin place of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, the obscure German ducal lineage that replaced the original royal houses of Europe, primarily through first cousins Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, but the original royal houses were also replaced through other descendants of Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, the progenitor of this ducal lineage, who was born in 1750. Gotha was also where Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati in 1776, went to live in 1784 under the protection of Duke Ernest of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg. When Weishaupt's radical views on Illuminism got him into trouble with the ruler in Bavaria after his writings were intercepted and deemed seditious. We are told he was born in 1748, just 2 years before Duke Francis was born, and died in Gotha in 1830. You know, the founder of that Illuminati. And as I mentioned previously in this video, members of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha had wyverns and wyvern tails prominently featured in their coats of arms, like this one of the Portuguese royal house of Braganza that married into the obscure ducal family in 1836, when Prince Ferdinand of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha married Queen Maria II of Portugal. Again, wyverns are described as unambiguously malicious predators, and wyverns in heraldry signify war, envy, and pestilence, which is certainly something we've been seeing all along this alignment in our modern history. So Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the founder of the Rothschild international banking family dynasty throughout major cities of Europe, was born in 1744. Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, was born in 1748, and Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, the progenitor of the obscure ducal lineage that replaced the original royal houses of Europe, was born in 1750. These 3 men were all born in Germany within 6 years of each other, and in the 9-year time period after the Great Frost of Ireland, an extraordinary cold weather event in Ireland between 1740 and 1741, during which time the Irish population endured 21 months of bizarre weather without known precedent that defied conventional explanation, and the cause was not known. This leads into how I believe the Great Frost of Ireland was a rip in the fabric of space-time caused by the Philadelphia experiment, which then allowed great evil in the form of parasitic non-human souls to incarnate in human form on the Earth, and subsequently created the conditions for the world we are living in today. More on this belief to come later in this video. Interestingly, there was a movie made in 1980 called The Final Countdown, which was about a time-traveling naval vessel in the form of the USS Nimitz going back in time to the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941. And I do believe that the coat of arms of Tenerife is telling us something that is otherwise hidden from our awareness, with the image of a tree on the shield that is enclosed between a wyvern supporter on either side. Is Mount Teide on Tenerife the remnants of a giant tree, as well as all the other volcanic islands, seamounts, guillots, and monadnocks? The term monad, found in the word monadnock, has been used in philosophical schools, like that of the Pythagorean, to represent the absolute, the supreme being, divinity, and the totality of all things. Among many other things, Chad and I talked about this in depth in our previously mentioned deeper conversation with Chad on giant trees, the Earth's grid, and the New World Order. Furthermore, were the giant trees generating the Earth's magnetic field and not the geodynamo process accepted by mainstream science connected to the interaction of the Earth's rotational axis with the molten iron and nickel in the Earth's outer core? Is this why volcanoes and seamounts are on airline flight trackers for navigational purposes and not for entertainment alone? I recently found a mountain in Mexico associated with magnetic declination just outside of Teotihuacan on an alignment I am currently researching. The town of San Luis Tesuautitlan is located in altitude at 2,450 meters or 8,038 feet on Cerro Gordo, Tonantepetl. Cerro Gordo means fat hill and has that giant tree stump looking appearance. I found this map when I typed in San Luis Tesuautitlan to look for information on it, and it was in a link about the magnetic declination there. Magnetic declination, also known as magnetic variation, is the angle between true north and magnetic north at a specific location on Earth, and this is important because it is needed to determine true north and affects the accuracy of navigational tools. Then there's the fabled Rupus nigra, or black rock, to consider as a giant tree stump. In a nutshell, the Rupus nigra was believed to be an enormous mountain of magnetic stone located at the magnetic North Pole and 33 miles or 53 kilometers wide, and explained why compasses always pointed north. This is known as the 1595 Arctic map of Gerardus Mercator, and was published after his death in 1594 by his son. But the Rupus nigra also comes down to us as a phantom island, defined as an island that existed on maps for a period of time, but was found later not to exist. In our historical narrative, Gerardus Mercator was a Flemish geographer, cartographer, and cosmographer who was also a globe maker, like this one from 1541. And the Earth's ley lines started to disappear from maps when Gerardus Mercator published a world map in 1569 that is considered to be the first where sailing courses on the sphere were mapped to the plane map, allowing for a correction of the chart to be more useful for sailors. Now, what about the electro part of the electromagnetic grid? I think in ancient times, known to us as Neolithic, it was comprised of different kinds of stone circles and standing stone configurations, other types of henges, cursus, dolmens, barrows, and so forth, like what you see at Stonehenge in England and Carnac in Brittany in France, for two examples of countless found all over the earth. There's even a perfect Stonehenge in Washington State, but it was said to have been built as a war memorial between 1918 and 1929. And the Miami Circle was discovered in 1998 in downtown Miami, Florida, when the building complex sitting on top of it was torn down. It had a septic tank in it too. In 2002, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2009, it was declared a National Historic Landmark. Back in England, the stone circle of Arbor Low has a tree reference right in it, with an arbor being defined as a shady garden alcove with sides and a roof formed by trees. Arbor Low is a hub of ley lines, as seen in this screenshot I received from Adam of Alchemy Spectrum. Adam works with ley lines to heal people and places, and he also makes videos about his ley line research. Adam has joined Chad and I in 3 deeper conversations with Chad, where we bring together our different lines of research and talk about what we think has taken place here. Similar to Arbor Low in England, the Monadnock Pilot Mountain in North Carolina was identified as a ley line hub by geographer Peter Champoux on the homepage of his website. Peter Champoux has done incredible work on specific ley lines as seen on his website geometriaplace.com. As time went on from the megalithic infrastructure of the Neolithic or New Stone Age, the electro part of the electromagnetic grid evolved into rail infrastructure, lighthouses, star forts, S-shaped rivers, hydroelectric plants, bridges, and so much more. What was interesting was finding out that the megalithic infrastructure was still part of the electromagnetic grid system as it evolved. Using Pilot Mountain as an example, it was known as Mount Ararat before it was called Pilot Mountain. I looked into it and found the historic Ararat River with rail infrastructure running beside it on the top left, and today's Ararat River Greenway Trail, where the railroad used to be, on the bottom right. The Ararat River Greenway Trail is at the eastern edge of the city of Mount Airy. More examples of finding out that the megalithic and ancient infrastructure was still part of the electromagnetic grid system as it evolved include, but are not limited to, Machu Picchu in Peru, which is accessible by a train which runs along the S-shaped Urubamba River, and the Great Serpent Mound in Peebles in Adams County, Ohio. The Great Serpent Mound is in close proximity to the S-shaped bends of Brush Creek and its nearby confluences and junctions with other watercourses, as seen in this illustration circa 1883 compared with the Google Earth screenshot of the location on the right. From the 1914 railroad map of Ohio from the Ohio Public Utilities Commission, here is a close-up of the railroads in the southwestern part of Ohio, where Peebles and Adams County is located, near the state's border with Kentucky, which is formed by the S-shaped bends of the Ohio River. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad is marked in yellow on the map, where it parallels